This is Real Talk. We discuss important issues impacting our world and how we, as humanity, come together, overcome our obstacles, and move forward toward a bright and beautiful future. I'm Shay Sparks, here to ignite the light in the world. We invite you to check us out on unitednetwork.tv. And on today's Real Talk, we're talking about how people don't die like they do in the movies. Our guest today on Real Talk is a registered nurse, award-winning end-of-life educator, and nurse. She's a Hospice Innovator Award winner and International Humanitarian Woman of the Year, and author of multiple books and booklets. She's a hospice pioneer. Welcome, Barbara Karnes.
Thank you for having me here today. I look forward to a really exciting conversation.
Well, it is a pleasure, Barbara, to connect with you as we just formally got introduced and found out we were kindred spirits separated by time and space and all the things, lived in the same areas. So thank you for being here to share your story. And I'm just curious with what we're talking about today. So what do you mean people don't die like they do in the movies?
We don't have any role models on what people really look like when they're dying. You know, it used to be before the 50s, Grandma died at home. She was in the upstairs bedroom and all the family was there. And we learned how to die because we were there. And then hospitals became more prominent in our healthcare. And so people went to the hospital and they died there, often alone at the end of the hall. And from hospitals, we gravitated to nursing facilities. And again, Grandma died in a room, generally by herself. Today, our medical establishment or habits have come full circle, and more people want to die at home. But because all of these years, no one has really seen people dying except in the movies. And that's not how people die. And because it isn't how people die, people, when they're at the bedside with Grandma, think something is wrong, think something pathological is happening because she's not doing it like they do in the movies.
So when you say pathological, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, dying, in the movies, Judi Dench says something very profound, and then she closes her eyes and she's dead.
Yeah.
Very peaceful, very clean, very tidy.
Yeah.
People die with their eyes partially open, with peeing and pooping the bed, with their hands moving around. It's not pretty. And so people think, well, it doesn't look like Judi Dench did, so something must be wrong. And so my job, and a lot of other people's job, is to educate the community. So when you're with Grandma and she's dying, you can support her, you can love her. And part of that all comes from being secure in the knowledge that Grandma's doing what she's supposed to be doing. This is how people die.
So it's really about bringing awareness to the natural body functions of death.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why the work you're doing today, that we're doing today, is so important, because we're neutralizing the fear that everyone brings to the bedside, and knowledge reduces fear.
Yeah. So what is hospice care? So we talk about, they want to die at home, but there's hospice care at home, or is it in the hospital, or is it something completely different?
Hospice care can either be in the home, and that's where most people have hospice is in their home because it's hard work being a caregiver. It's hard work taking care of someone who's dying. And so you really need the support of someone that can guide you. And that's where hospice comes in. Hospice also provides support and guidance for people in nursing facilities, in assisted living facilities. And hospice also has what I call hospice houses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like a hospital. It's not like a nursing facility. It's like a home that holds more people than one.
So I have my own example of hospice care, and it was really more of a twofold for my family. So when we got introduced to hospice, it was right after my mom had a terminal diagnosis, and they came in as palliative care to really help her with the pain, as well as what would happen after palliative care was needed, like in the dying process, and also help for us to kind of explain what was going on and being supportive of us. And I think a lot of people think that hospice care is just at the last stage, but there's so much more that hospice care can provide. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Jimmy Carter did our country and our end of life area a really big help because he's been on hospice, 9 months?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing about hospice is that hospice is helping people live the best they can until they don't. And in the months before death, hospice can support and guide not just the patient, not just the person with the life-threatening illness, but the family. Can help bring everyone together and can teach the family how to guide and support and take care of their loved one. Unfortunately, hospice is associated with dying. And so families don't think about hospice until their special person looks like they're dying. Mm-hmm. And when you look like you're dying, you have 1 to 3 weeks to live. Mm-hmm. But in the months before death, you may look sick and frail and fragile, but you don't look like you're dying. You just look sick. And so I don't need hospice yet, when in reality, that's the best time to have hospice.
Yeah, when my mom was diagnosed, the doctor basically just gave her a book to read that said that with her diagnosis, she had 4 to 6 months to live. And they said, there was really no treatment, so to contact hospice. And she was adamant, thinking like, no, I don't want to do that. It's not end of life. I'm not there yet. And, my brother and I were the caregivers, and we said, you know what, let's just bring them in and have the conversation so we're all informed on what it is that they provide. And we all walked away with this education that we had no idea was out there, that they help with the pain management in that stage. And she was under hospice care for 14 months. So from diagnosis to her final day, it was such a honor to work with hospice, but it was just a beautiful transition to have them in our home and being able to help us help her.
Well, and I think what's really important, and you've pointed that out, hospice doesn't just take care of the patient. Hospice takes care of the family as much as the patient, and supports and guides and educates the family so that the family can have a sacred experience. And with that sacred experience, because all of the work leads up to the moment of death, that's the goal, that's the work. And then gradually hospice withdraws, but gradually by creating this sacred experience, the family will then carry that sacred memory with them forever. And unfortunately, a lot of people carry a fearful memory with them forever. And we want to avoid that and give them the beauty that can be there.
I love that. You're giving them the beauty that can be there. Since you are the pioneer of hospice, and we were talking before we got started that, you started the hospice in a hospital near where I used to live. What was the dying process like before hospice came along?
Okay, well, I'm going to back up for a minute, because before I went to work for that hospital in the early 80s, like 80, 81, hospice was just coming to this country. And it was not for profit, strictly volunteer. And I wanted to work for a hospice. So I hired on, the hospice hired their first nurse, and I became her backup person. Now, I eventually became director of that hospice, but that's beside the point. Those first 5 years being a primary care hospice nurse, our goal was to be with the patient and family at the moment of death. And so, as I said, that's the goal, everything we did. So for those 5 years, I was at the bedside, not just in the months and weeks before death, but at the moment. And that taught me what dying is like. At some point, I thought, these people are all doing similar things. And I noted that there's a process to dying, that you either die fast or you die gradually. And fast death is getting hit by a truck out here, a heart attack, suicide. You're alive 1 minute and you're dead the next. There's no process. But gradual death is from disease or old age, and it has a process. The only difference between death from dying from an illness and dying from old age is time. Person with no disease that's just old is going to do the same things, only it's going to take them longer. When I talk about the changes and the beginning of the dying process, which is months before death, for someone who's just old, it can be years. But when it comes down to weeks, when what I call labor begins, then we all die the same, including fast death. So if it takes you 3 or 4 hours to die a fast death, say you got run over by a truck, you will do the same thing that someone who is dying at home in their bed and has been sick for a long time.
So what does that look like?
What does it look like? Okay. Months before death, 3 things start happening. A person's eating habits change, a person's sleeping habits change, and their social ability changes. And it's on a continuum, starts 2 to 3 to 4 months before death. And gradually on this continuum, it goes to the moment of death. So it starts food. They stop eating meat. And then pretty soon it's fruits and vegetables. And then it's anything that takes energy to digest. Soft foods then, and ice cream. Ice cream goes a long way. You can get ice cream up almost to the last moment. Sleeping starts with an afternoon nap, then pretty soon a morning and an afternoon nap. And then one day they don't get out of bed. and they're asleep more than they're awake. And the third thing is socialization. At first, it's they don't watch, they're not interested in their favorite football team. They don't follow it anymore. They're the news that they have to watch every night. They don't watch it every night. And then it's don't have the church ladies come over. I'm too tired. And then it's don't have the grandkids come over. And then they withdraw and go completely within. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. They're disconnecting their threads, their connections with this world, and they're building their place in the other world. Labor begins 1 to 3 weeks before death. And that's the day you walk in the room and the person's sleeping with their eyes partially open and they're starting and stop breathing. And you think, oh my gosh, he's dead. And then pretty soon he starts breathing again. And there's random hand movements and unsettledness, picking the air, working their clothes. That says labor has begun. And then you get to a place where you're talking days to hours. And now the person is non-responsive. I believe they can hear. So you talk to them, you tell them how much you'll love them and you're going to miss them, and you tell them what's going on. But they're basically non-responsive. That doesn't mean they aren't talking. They can be talking to and about things that we don't understand. Often our loved ones who have died before them, they'll start talking to them in the days to hours before death. And that's part of the normal process. And then minutes to hours before death, there is generally a facial expression change, often a frown, often a grimace. Just, it's almost that pull, that tug when the driver gets out of the car and they're gone.
Thank you for explaining all of that and going in deeper. As you're talking, it brings tears to my eyes. It reminds me of watching my mom's process. And you explained it exactly how it happened. She started to lose interest in food, different foods at first, and then it went down to nothing at all. And although ice cream was one that I don't think she ate much of, but definitely soft foods for sure. And then just probably, I'm trying to think, maybe 5 days before, she started the restlessness. She started the grabbing. She started the trying to get out of bed in the middle of the night. She would say things. And I remember asking the hospice nurse at the time, I'm like, what is going on? Now, interestingly enough, during this time of my life, I was a hairstylist. So I had lots of clients who were hospice nurses. So I had heard stories about how people are at this end of life stage. And yet when I was witnessing it and experiencing myself, it like all knowledge went out the door. So I was able to ask our hospice nurse, like, what is going on? And she's like, oh, she's connecting with the angels that are there for her. And to just hear that, it was like, got it. Thank you for the confirmation of peace so that I know that she's in peace. And I think a lot of times people think dying is one scary, but also extremely painful, which I know it can be. And is there a way to know when someone is in those stages where they're not speaking, that they are in pain?
Great point. Dying itself is not painful. Disease causes pain. So and there's a lot of diseases out there that people die from that cause pain. And if the disease causes pain, then you're going to treat that pain till the person's last breath, because the pain, it doesn't go away. All the pain medicine does is cover up the pain. So what's causing the pain is still there. So you treat that even though the person is non-responsive. If pain was part of their disease, then you treat that till the last breath. However, dying is not painful, and not all disease has pain. Mm. So if a person doesn't have a history of pain in their disease, then it doesn't mean that they will have pain when they're in labor or in the days to hours before death. What they may feel is like we feel if we have the flu, not COVID, but the heavy, tired, all ache all over, the restlessness. You give a couple of Ativan, a couple to deal with the restlessness, and some ibuprofen to deal with the discomfort. Just because a person is dying does not mean that you bring in the narcotics.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people have a stereotype of that hospice is there to just push the morphine and to quote unquote kill you. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And my mom's experience was actually the opposite of that. She had pain before she was diagnosed all the way through up until about, I would say about 2 months before she passed. And it was remarkable that all of a sudden she had no pain. And I know her and I had talked about it for so long that it was as if God gave her a break from the pain. So she was able to just settle in and be at peace and be at comfort for those last 2 months. And then, yeah, really beautiful. And then she was able to, what she wanted was to just go peacefully in her sleep. And that's exactly how she went.
Oh, what a gift. What a gift.
Yeah. So when people talk about that as a hospice nurse, what are some of the things about the narcotics? What are some of the things that you really want them to know about administrating narcotics? So sometimes I've heard where the patient's family is the one administrating it and not the hospice nurse. So what is it that you want them to know, what that means and what that looks like?
Okay, well, the hospice nurse's job is to teach the caregivers how to take care of their special person when the hospice nurse and team isn't there, which is most of the time. Yeah. They may come for an hour a couple of times a week. As death gets closer, I certainly hope they come for an hour or so every day to support the family. But the key thing is education. 90% of hospice's work is education. And to educate the use of narcotics, the side effects and the downside of narcotics. Our society today runs on fear of narcotics. It's so prevalent. And so if you just mention the word fentanyl or morphine, it generates fear. And that's why the hospice nurse needs to sit down and explain and answer all the questions, because if the hospice nurse does not educate the family in all the stuff I've just said about narcotics, then when mom dies, the family is going to say, hospice killed my mom. And I get emails weekly with that very thing. And what that tells me is hospice did not do their job
Mm,
in educating the family.
sure. And I believe that that's just such a huge myth that people are, like you said, not educated enough. So I love that you're really sharing how hospice is about education rather than this is it. Like now you got to freak out. Now you got to worry. Now you have so much to like, oh gosh, now I got to do all these things. And it's really about learning, which is what my family and I experienced when we had called them in to just understand what it is that they offer. And that was just a huge moment for us to be educated just in the first conversation, not to mention all the things that they educated us on leading it up to it. So as the hospice nurses come in and the family is preparing, is there something that they recommend for this process? Like maybe it's music, or maybe it's their favorite poetry, or things like that when their family is gathered.
In the hours
Yeah.
before death,
Mhm.
this is just Barbara.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think if Dad, who's dying, loved Rod Stewart, then you play Rod Stewart. You don't have to bring in a harp and have harp playing because Dad's dying.
Yeah.
You play music, anything you want that he would enjoy, and just have it softly in the background. You don't have to have the curtains drawn and the lights out. You can have the family in the room. You can have the dog or cat on the bed. You talk to them. One of the things that I think is really important is that each significant person in this person's life who is dying has the opportunity, when the patient is non-responsive, to go in alone and talk to them. Because I believe a person can hear right up to the moment of death, maybe even after the moment of death. And so you talk to that person, hold their hand if that's what you want to do, crawl in bed with them if that's what you want to do, and talk to them from your heart. Talk about the good times, talk about the difficult times. There's no perfect relationship. Remember, Dad, when you took me behind the garage and beat the tar out of me? You shouldn't have done that. That still hurts. You talk about all of that. Every single person that is there has their own time alone. Then they all come back, and you can hold the person's hands. You can sit around the bed. If it's a long labor, you can work puzzles. Look at scrapbooks are wonderful. Share scrapbooks and pictures and reminisce as a family, as significant people together. This is a sacred time. And so that's what we're creating, are these sacred memories. When death has occurred, before the funeral home comes, before I would call the funeral home, I again recommend that each person there go in alone and say goodbye to the body. It's the last time you will see or be with them. It won't be the same in the funeral home. This is the last time. And so each individual goes in, sits on the bed, by the bed, holds their hand, hugs that body. That's how we recognized someone. That's how we knew that person was, to look at their body. And we're going to miss that too. And so we have to say goodbye. Then you call the funeral home. Then the funeral home comes.
Speaking about watching the labor, my dad, on the other hand, was in the hospital, and he was we had talked about moving him to a hospice house, like we had mentioned earlier. And at this point, he was in no condition to be moved. And so we brought in the doctor to give us the options of what we had. And he was still cognizant enough to make all of the decisions himself. And I'm so blessed to be able to have had him for that experience. And then he was surrounded by his children, his wife, his siblings, his nieces and nephews. And as they administrated the drugs, he was still talking for another hour, and just be able to like be with him. And we held him and held his hands, and we did all the things you were saying. And we had the music softly playing. His was Elvis, not Rod Stewart, but, being able to really honor him and really create a space that he loved. And I had the honor of going a week before I was there and, asking him what he wanted for his service, and, all the details that he wanted, all the way down to what suit he was wearing and all those things. But then we took a break because there was several hours had gone by, and he was doing that breathing, where they hesitate in between, and all of us in the room are holding our breath while he's holding his breath, and then he would let the next breath, and then we all exhale as well. And it was just even though it was emotional, it was just such a gift that he gave us, that we gave him. And then at the point that the nurse and the chaplain from the hospital came back in and said, prayed over him the second time, I said, and I don't even know why I was the messenger, but I said, well, maybe we need to exit the room and give him a break. And so we exited the room, and some other people showed up immediately. And it was like we were passing in the hallway, and they went in and said their goodbyes. And then when they came out, I feel like I was lifted up and carried back in there. And as soon as I saw the nurse holding his hand, she said, do you want to hold his hand? And I grabbed his hand, and he took his last breath. And I will say that just being able to experience that, and had already experienced it with my mom, there's something extremely profound, beautiful, sacred, like you had mentioned. And whatever feelings, unprocessed feelings that you have for that person, when you're in that last moment of breath, they all disappear. And all it is genuine, authentic, unconditional love.
Mm-hmm. You're beautifully said. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you for doing the work that you are doing and being the example of what unconditional looks like in your everyday life. So thank you for that. And with that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll learn more about being a hospice pioneer with Barbara Karnes.
Tired of being programmed? United Network is a new network for a new reality. Get exclusive access to all of our original content, including UNN newscasts, world situation reports, and in-depth stories from our field messengers. Discover powerful techniques to enhance your mind, body, and spirit through the GHWC's health and wellness videos. Plus, original series to inspire and encourage you throughout your day. Watch United Network at home through your favorite online streaming program or on the go with our mobile apps. Start your free trial today.
Welcome back to Real Talk. Before the break, we were talking about how we don't really die like what happens in the movies. And now we'll talk more about being a hospice pioneer with Barbara Karnes. So Barbara, we just had an amazing role of what hospice does and what it looks like and what the movies don't realistically portray. So kind of take us back to more your story of how did you get inspired to become a hospice pioneer? You kind of talked about it a little bit, but maybe even go from being a nurse into like, what was that moment like, oh, I definitely want to do this end of life care.
I graduated from nursing school in 1962. And I thought, I have made a huge mistake. I should have never been a nurse, should have been a social worker. So I never worked in the medical arena, in the medical field. I got married, I had raised a family of 3 children, and it was in the 70s that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, came forward and said, Americans are treating their dying very poorly. They're putting them at the end of the hall, and there they die. And I went out and spent a week with her in a workshop in 1979. And I was going to learn how to take care of people who were dying. So that was interesting. At that same time, Dame Cicely Saunders in England developed what she called hospice care. She had a facility, and her idea was dying is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. And in this facility, we're going to have cocktails, we'll have tea, we'll let the dog and the cat come in. And that philosophy came over into the United States. That would have been in the mid-70s. And those two things, Dame Cicely Saunders and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, it was like, yes, I want to do this work. In the earlier 70s, I had spent a lot of time reading every self-help book you ever found. It was, what is life all about? What does it mean? And so I felt I had a foundation in that everybody dies. We are born, we experience, and we die. And so dying wasn't something pathological. It was something we all are going to do. And so that's what drew me. So I moved from Omaha to Kansas City, and I didn't know anyone. And so I went to a church study group on world religions. And the first meeting was, well, let's go around the room and meet each other. Say a little something about yourself. So I said, I just moved here, I want to meet people, and I'm interested in hospice. In that same group was a man who was the volunteer coordinator for the first hospice in Kansas City.
Wow. And
he came up to me afterwards and he said, we're looking right now to hire an RN and come interview for the job. And I said, well, no, I can't. And I had gotten renewed my license. I took a refresher course at KU so that I was current. And I said, no, I can't do that. But I'll tell you what, I will volunteer 20 hours a week to work with the nurse you hire. And I thought, hey, that's just great. So that's what happened. After 4 months, they brought me on staff, and I went from 20 hours to 40 hours to 60 hours. And, for 5 years, I was one of the primary care nurses when hospice was just starting. And I then left and went to work for a hospital and got their program developed after being the director of the hospice that I started out as a volunteer with in those early days. But that's where I learned, because there weren't books on how to die, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wasn't saying how people die. She was pointing out that they are dying and they're dying alone. And here's what you need to do if you're going to work with dying, which was put your own house in order first. And then when you understand yourself, then you can go help someone else. So she was a powerful influence in my life.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you learned through your experience in those early days, especially working with her and as a volunteer in that first hospice before you became the nurse there, is that you learned how it is to die with dignity and integrity.
Well, I'm gonna back up and say what I learned was how people die. Some people die with dignity, some with integrity, and some just die. And it's not, hold on just a minute. I'm on a Zoom. Sorry.
It's okay.
So I learned those 5 years how people die. And that, as we said, it's not like the movies. Mm-hmm. Taking that information, I'll tell you a story. Part of being a hospice nurse, we were on call every other week, 24/7 for 7 days. I was on call 24/7 for 7 days. The other nurse was on call. And the goblins always come out at night in 3 o'clock in the morning. And so our goal as hospice nurses was to be with the family at the moment of death. Mm-hmm. That was the goal. Mm-hmm. So one night I'm with a family and they had called me and they were scared, and I went over. And Mom was doing fine. There wasn't really she was dying, but not that moment. She was in labor. So I'm sitting in the living room with the family around me, and I'm explaining, this is what Mom's doing. It's, nothing bad is happening. And one of the daughters was taking notes. And I thought, oh my goodness, what is wrong with this picture? She should not have to be taking notes. Mm. So that weekend, this is before computers, I sat with a yellow legal pad and wrote out what I wanted families to know. Mm. And then I printed it out and made it into a booklet, which became Gone From My Sight. And the idea was at 3 o'clock in the morning, I want families to be able to open that blue book and go, oh yeah, this is what Mom's doing. Oh, this is normal. This is okay. Sad, but nothing bad is happening. And that's why I wrote the little blue book.
I'm so glad that you did. And in that book, or is there other books that you have written, or maybe it's just some advice that you would share, since you're sitting with those families, how do you suggest, or how do you even explain how to cope with the grief of the loved one that is going? And is there a way that you explain or help with the grief when they can't be there surrounding their loved one?
Well, as a result of Gone From My Sight, I then wrote a grief booklet called My Friend I Care, because I was getting letters from families telling me that Mom died and they wanted 3 more copies of Gone From My Sight. And I thought, they don't need Gone From My Sight, although it's helpful to read it, because then you understand that what Mom did was normal and not pathological. But so I wrote the grief booklet. And then when hospice evolved to the point where they really aren't with the family at the moment of death, I thought people need another booklet. And I wrote The 11th Hour, which tells families what to do while the person is dying. So my Gone From My Sight says, here's what's happening and what's normal. And the 11th hour is here's what you do while it's happening. Then I wrote a book on dementia, because dementia in the last few years has become a very prominent disease in our country. And really, dementia is a symptom, it's not a disease. It's a symptom of a variety of diseases. But dementia doesn't play by the rules of dying. And so I wrote a booklet called How Do I Know You, that addresses end of life and dementia. Then, with all the morphine fear that's going on, I wrote a booklet on pain. And it's literally pain at end of life. So anytime I've seen a need, I've written a booklet. So you have to go to my website, but you'll see them all. And I'm sure people who are living through this will find help and guidance.
Well, it seems like if you know someone who is going through this might be an awkward gift, but a very informative, educational gift to give someone. So as a collective of humanity, how can we support caregivers? And what is it that we need to do in order to support people who are giving care to their loved ones?
Oh, such a good point. Actually, I wrote a booklet on being a caregiver, which is By Your Side. Caregivers get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
It's like all the attention is going to the person who's dying, and yet the 24/7 person who's has no break, who gets no attention, is the caregiver. And most caregivers turn out to be people pleasers. And so they put their own needs behind everyone else. And being a caregiver for someone being a caregiver, period, whether the person's dying or not, is hard, selfless work.
Yeah.
And that caregiver needs to, first off, figure out how to take care of themselves, because they usually don't. They usually put everyone else's needs before theirs.
Right.
And they have to learn how to put their oxygen mask on first, because if they don't take care of themselves, then they won't be able to take care of their special person. So that's really, really important, on having some downtime, having a neighbor or a friend or a hospice volunteer come in, and either that's an opportunity to get out of the house and go to lunch with a friend. Maybe it's just an opportunity to go take a nap, because a caregiver's job is 24/7. It's not shift work. It's complete around the clock work. And so we kind of don't take as good a care of our caregivers as I'd like to see, because they're not only doing the caregiving, they're taking care of someone that they have emotional attachment and feelings for, love for, and that compounds the emotions that they're carrying around while they're taking care of someone. You know, it's hard work if you're taking care of Mr. Smith, who lives down the street, but it's really hard work when you're taking care of your dad.
Yes, it is. Besides your books, and we know that hospice is here in the United States. So, besides your books, is there other resources? And hospice, is it international or is it only in this country?
Hospice is around the world, started in England, but it is around the world. I'm sure there's countries that don't have it, but generally speaking, it's an international concept. So wherever you are, that what I want to stress is if the doctors have told your special person or yourself that they can't fix you. If they've said, go home, put your affairs in order, you're going to die. I don't know when, but you're going to. With that knowledge, that's when you want to explore hospice. Hospice has a 6-month, Medicare mandate. However, that can be extended. They're reevaluated, as your mother, they're reevaluated. And if the person continues systematically to deteriorate, then hospice can justify why they're keeping this person on. Your mother was an example. Jimmy Carter is an example. And what's so sad is that most people wait until their special person looks like they're dying.
Yeah.
Then they have 1 to 3 weeks to live. Where if they have months from diagnosis, go into palliative care like you did, have palliative care, then switch over to hospice, then the caregiver has the support and guidance to make this a meaningful, heartfelt experience instead of, oh my gosh, I just want this over with. I'm so tired. And then the caregiver feels so guilty. Oh my gosh, that means mom has to die and what a bad person I am, when really that's just normal feelings of exhaustion.
Yeah. Well, I love that you said, as soon as you get that word from the doctor, I think also that's the best time to get educated. Like you said, hospice is the education. So allow them to come in and really teach you what it is that they offer, because there's so many different things that they offer that you might not even know about if your mind isn't thinking, right? You're thinking on oh God, it's the end. So definitely call in the hospice. So I'm sorry.
There's a lot of hospices out there. So in the months, once you've got that diagnosis, start shopping hospices. Look up in your yellow pages or Google all of the hospices in your area and interview every one of them. Because even though they're all Medicare certified, they're still different hospices. And so interview and find the one that you relate to. And that's the one you use. Don't just call one hospice and say, yeah, come talk to me. If you were buying a car, you wouldn't just go buy a car. You would shop cars, you would shop pricing, you would ride them, drive them. And yet what we do with healthcare and with hospices, we don't shop around. And that's to our detriment by not shopping. So shop for your hospice as well as shop for your doctor, but that's a whole other talk.
That is another program. We may have to have you on for that at some point. But how do we get in touch with, how do we stay connected? How do we get your books? Do you have a website, social media, all of those things?
I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and I have a website, which is bkbooks.com. You can email me if you want, and that would be barbara@bkbooks.com. I don't talk on the phone, but I answer all of my emails. So if you have a problem, if you need some support or guidance, send me an email. And check out the website because there's podcasts, there's books. I also have books I didn't even talk about, videos. I've got DVDs, all kinds of end-of-life information so that you can educate yourself so that you understand the normal, natural way death comes and what to do.
Well, Barbara, thank you for educating yourself so that you could educate all of us. And thank you for being here.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Hope we get to do it again.
Me too. Me too. Thank you. Real Talk is available as a podcast, which you can subscribe through your favorite podcasting app. You can also visit unitednetwork.tv or download our network app on iOS, Android, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. I am Shay Sparks. This is Real Talk for the Real World.